Okay, Raimy, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Benny. How are you?
Good, good, good. I'm excited about this next episode that we're about to do. Before we do that, let me again remind everybody about liking, finding, sharing, subscribing, and promoting this podcast near and far wherever they are. You can find us on all the actual obvious podcast platforms, but as always, invite people to share their comments, their thoughts, their insights, their questions, their disagreements, and their recommendations for potential guests for the future of this podcast. And for now, our good of the week.
Yeah. So my good of the week is a little bit anticipatory, right? Because I don't have it yet, but I'm going to have it tonight. Tonight, I am attending a professional development webinar that I'm really excited about. It's by Tom Ahern, who is a raising writing guru, copywriter. But this particular newsletter, I gave it away. This particular webinar is about converting newsletter subscribers into donors. And it's something that I've worked on a lot with different organizations. It's something um, I'm super interested in, and I feel like I'm hearing it from someone who has done it before, literally and figuratively written the book on it. And I don't often get excited to go to these types of webinars. I normally watch the recording afterward at 1.5 speed while I'm doing something else at the same time. But this is something that will absolutely have my full attention. I have very high expectations for it. So my good of the week is the webinar that I'm attending tonight by Tom Ahern.
So we'll have to find out afterward if the expectations were met, and then the ROI, whether or not you're able to actually successfully turn newsletter subscribers into donors. So
Exactly, exactly. I will let you and our listeners know how it goes.
full disclosure, I did see that also promoted, and I cheaped out. I gotta be honest. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make it, and um, but it was interesting to me because newsletters is something that I'm very keen on in terms of I write a newsletter or two for a couple of people right now, and that's an important piece of the puzzle is turning those people, their subscribers and their audiences into donors for their organization. That's one of it. But two, also, I feel very much that the newsletter business in the nonprofit space is undervalued in terms of the potential impact that it can have on an organization and its success. And I don't think enough organizations I know a lot of organizations do newsletters. They're usually terrible, which is a whole other subject, but I'd be curious to hear from you some of the key learnings that you get from there. And then it's two for one because you paid for it and I didn't. So
I'm happy to
but
share. Happy to
but
share.
hey, that's how we grow. We share.
That's how learning works. That's how learning works.
It's a good subject, and newsletters. I think it's an undervalued superpower for organizations, and they just simply don't use it for a lot of reasons. Again, not maybe not for now to talk about it. Maybe we should find somebody who's really good at these newsletters. I haven't found really that person yet.
I'm
Um,
going to be good at them in just a couple of hours. I'm going to
I
get
know,
like the mate.
but to
I'm going
bring
to
you
get the
on as a
ma-
guest on your
I'm
own
going to get the
podcast was a
matrix. I'm
little
going to get the matrix plugged into my brain. I'm going to understand it all, and then we're going to go from there.
yes, Neo Raimi Rubin.
There you go.
Is that room the Nebuchadnezzar where you're sitting?
That's
Uh,
it. That's it.
Okay, so now I've also answered a question from last week. The Matrix is a series of films that you are aware of.
Yeah, there's like weird exceptions to my no sci-fi fantasy world rules. Like it's not hard and fast.
So funny is I would have thought the total opposite about you, that you would have been like deeply into some of these things, but okay, you're not. So it's fine. You're more real stories, nonfiction books, that kind of stuff. Okay, get it.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, good. My good of the week is usually I go organizational leader kind of a thing. Gonna go personal here this week. My son started a YouTube shorts channel last week as a business venture, and he has more views from one video than we may have for a very long time with this podcast. He's was like bothering me about it for a while, and I wasn't sure, and we had to figure out how to set it up. Finally, we figured out how to set it up. He started, and it's basketball highlights. That's really all it is. He just shows clips of basketball highlights, and he's convinced that he's almost 16 years old, that this is going to be like his opportunity to make a lot of money. He hears about Faces YouTube channels. There's a whole science behind it. He knows he has some friends who do it also, and they're not the brightest, in the bunch. So he figures if they can do this and be successful at this, why couldn't he? And so he puts up this video last week. It's not a recent video. It's a video of LeBron James in the famous chase down video with the block, right? It's, I don't know, like a 25-second clip, 12,000 views in
How
4 days.
how does that happen?
We don't know. We don't know, but it just kept happening, right? So but his other videos have done nothing, right? That
Fascinating.
one video, 12,000 views, and we were watching it. It was like every time we clicked back onto the page, there were more and then more and then more. I was like, what is going on here? And I kept thinking to myself, what am I doing trying to build an audience with a podcast when I could just do silly basketball clips or find another sport? Like I said to him, you should stop doing basketball. You should do soccer. He's like, why? I said, because the worldwide audience for soccer is bigger than basketball, right? So, but he's not interested in soccer. He's interested in basketball. So anyway, so he started his channel last week. He doesn't have so many subscribers. That's like his next thing is figuring out how to get subscribers and then how to replicate that success on that one video into these other videos. But it was in the first day. He put up like 4 videos the first day. That one hit 12,000 in very few days, like very quickly, and it was just shocking. But okay, now it's like he's going. I give him credit. Now it's like, okay, why did that work? How did that work? And how do I replicate that? And how do I get people to subscribe and not just to see the videos in their feed, but to like it and then subscribe also to his channel? That's the next part of it. But I give him a lot of credit, A, for starting, one, and two, I'm really curious to see how this goes because if this really does work, I'm out of here, baby. Like I'm gonna go find some avenue for some silly faceless YouTube channel that's gonna, break the bank for us here. And then I'll just do this purely for fun.
So,
Because right
so,
now I'm
so,
doing it for right now I'm doing this for the big bucks that we make on.
right, right, for sure. So that's the deal we're going to make is I'm going to share with you what I learned about turning newsletters into donation driving machines, and you're going to share with me how to make millions off YouTube Shorts. That
Well,
feels fair.
clearly, if I had like a green screen and just played basketball clips in the background while we were doing the podcast, probably better for our viewership and our subscribership, just to have both those things going on at the same time. But for the sake of just sheer shock of what that was last week, and to see how he's going to, replicate, duplicate, and make that actually a thing in the future would be super interesting. I will keep you posted on it. Okay, with that, we can take you inside to our next episode with the one and only Elisheva Hudson. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast, the Raimy and Bini Show. As always, great to have you here. We are joined this week with our guest, Elisheva Hudson, who I will intro in just a moment. Because I always forget to do this at the beginning, and I do this usually like an hour into a recording, I'm going to do it right now. Please do us our favor and like, subscribe, and share the podcast as much and as far and as wide as possible on every platform where we are available. There are more platforms than I am aware of, but by all means, share it. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, ideas, suggestions for additional guests in the future, by all means, reach out to us at RamyandBinnyPod@gmail.com. I see that I added a little email address there to you, Ramy. RamyandBinnyPod@gmail.com, or just catch us wherever you find us on LinkedIn and otherwise. It is great to have Elisheva Hudson with us here today. Elisheva is a documentary filmmaker with many, many years of experience working across the globe, promotional documentary spheres. She came to Israel. How many years ago did you come to Israel?
11 or 12 at this point. Yeah.
Okay, it's so long that you forgot how long. Not bad. Okay. Created Hudson Films, a company that helps both businesses and nonprofits increase their visibility and impact through powerful story-driven films. She is passionate about bringing a more authentic and story-driven approach to the promotional film world and breaking down how we interact with our audiences. Elisheva, it is awesome to have you here. Thank you for joining us today. Ramy,
Thank you
take
so
it
much
away.
for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So I wanted to start you off, ask you a little bit about your journey into this world, and I guess specifically what inspired you to get into filmmaking in the first place, and then focusing on the nonprofit world.
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I was always doing theater, creative arts, that sort of thing. My sister's actually an actress, so we're kind of like, I guess you could say, family business type of thing. And I loved theater, but I always knew it just wasn't going to be the direction I was going. So I felt like I was kind of interested in film, but so much about the being an artistic filmmaker sort of intimidated me. But I knew that was the direction I wanted to be in. So I kind of started in television, in news, and I did enjoy it. It was very fun. But after a while, I remember starting to feel, I don't know, just a bit bored with the whole like entertainment news, fast paced world. I was like, is this really what I want to do with myself? Is this really how I want to spend my time? So I started exploring other avenues. And when I found documentary, it was just like that. It was like a click. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love it. I love the fact that it was working with real people, real stories. I felt like there's so many interesting people out there in the world. Why are we making up stories when there's so many real people we could be following and documenting and sharing their story? And I also really loved that, of course, depending on the intention of the person, you have the power to educate people, to do good with it, to make a positive impact. Of course, you have the power to do that with any type of media and any type of storytelling. But for me, I really felt like a pull towards that. And I really just love the process of kind of finding that story when you're working with real people. So meeting somebody, interviewing them, and trying to piece together a story that makes sense to an audience, that will really speak to the audience. That's kind of how I found my way into the documentary world.
Okay, and then what led you to the nonprofit world?
Let's see what led me to the nonprofit world. Well, when I first came to Israel, I got a job working as a video editor. I kind of like changed countries and was getting back into my career and that sort of thing. And I was very grateful just to be working in my industry. It's not a simple thing to say like, oh, you're going to move to Israel and you're still going to work in your industry. So I was very grateful for that. But after a while, I really started missing other parts of production, filming, working with different types of people, working on different stories. So I kind of went part-time at my job and started to see, okay, is there like a thing with this freelance? Is there a need for video and could I do this? So that was my sort of half and half, not jumping straight in. And I saw that there was a need. Like I saw that there were lots of different types of people who needed lots of different types of videos. But at the time, I was really just doing anything. Like, you want to pay me to make a video? I don't care if it's this type or that type. Just, kind of really trying to get myself known out there and bring on more clients. And eventually I saw there was a need. So I quit my job and I went full time with this, but I still was very general with the type of work I was doing. But then I remembered, hey, I have this whole background in documentary. Maybe this is the way I could sort of differentiate myself and make a different type of content. So what I started doing was this thing I called mini docs. They were branding videos for entrepreneurs, and it sort of told the story behind the business. Like it could be with creatives, artists, photographers, lawyers, like different types of people, real estate people, but taking a more story driven approach. So let's talk a bit about what makes them different in a way that's going to speak to their audience. And then from there, I started expanding more into nonprofits. Why? Because so many nonprofits, this style of documentary, telling real stories, really, really speaks to them. And I really loved working with people who were equally passionate about what they're doing. You could say a lot of things about nonprofits, but the number one thing I would say that they are is really passionate about what they're doing and whatever issue is that they're working on, right? And so that style really, really spoke to them. And I really saw a big need to give to nonprofits this type of content, and it really works for them, helping them raise money, helping them spread their mission.
So I'm curious then, there's so many questions that came out of just what you said, to be honest, just in terms of the direction of the conversation. Before we dive into some of that, is there like I'm always curious about this too. Is there like a film or a documentary that distinctly stands out for you in your mind, was like, that just sort of set you on this kind of direction, or something you saw when you were studying film in school, like that just put you, that like, oh, that's the stuff I want to make?
Oh, that's so interesting. What a good question. I would say not necessarily. And it's funny because I'm not necessarily the person that, like, in my free time, all I watch is documentaries. I do watch documentaries, but I also, like, enjoy many other types of content. And I would also say I'm not like a one issue filmmaker. Like, there are many filmmakers out there who I find are like, I'm really passionate about women's rights, so I'm going to make all films about this. But it's not that way with me. I'm actually really passionate about the process of storytelling, meeting different types of people. And with each different story, kind of pulling out, like, what's the story here and who are we speaking to and what's the audience and all of that. So funnily enough, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily one film, but I will say something that was always interesting to me was that, you could take one topic and you could take one film, right? And you could have three different people make it and it would be totally, completely different. Funnily enough, even though we view documentary as this, like, quote unquote real, and it is real, we're working with real people, right? We're trying to film things as authentically as possible. And yet at the same time, I find that specifically in documentary, the director, the producer, the person who's putting together the story, you have such a big responsibility because because people perceive it as quote unquote true, you have a really big power to present it in a certain way. One person could interview the same person and tell a completely different story. And I think we all realize that today. This is kind of a different topic, but I think we all see that today, the way that media is shaped, the way that we gather our news, that sort of thing, that same idea. You can take one bit of information, but it can be delivered so differently.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like that last point just sounds very much like people saying that this is my truth, right? Or this is how I want it, right? Which is dangerous, but you're right that
Right.
there's always sort of the spin. I remember when I interviewed once for, I know I told Raimy this story some time ago. One of the places I interviewed for is not to run a nonprofit. I came into the interview telling them a different story about their organization than the one that they were telling everybody else, and it was a risk because they could have just said no, but they saw it. They saw it as, oh, that is an interesting take on who we are and what we do. Maybe that's a better take on who we are and what we do than what we're doing at the moment. So I definitely hear what you're saying there. That's a super interesting point.
Yeah, yeah.
Elisheva, when you work with nonprofits, when you work with organizations, do they typically engage you in a way where they know what they want from you and they say, we're trying to make this sort of video, would you
Mhm.
come and film it? Or are they saying, we know we want video film to be a part of our marketing, to be a part of our awareness ecosystem? Can you come in and help us tell that story?
What's the average? Okay, so there's definitely a range, but I would say it's more the first one that you mentioned. Why? Because especially with nonprofits, 9% of 99.99% of the time, budget is of the essence. So usually it happens that they're really only coming to you if they have a more specific goal. Now, that doesn't always mean that they come with a concept in mind. They may come and say, we have a fundraiser, we have a dinner, we are putting out an updated, rebranded website, and our video doesn't really represent us anymore. So usually it's that type of goal. Sometimes I may have someone who comes in with a really specific concept, but that's usually only at maybe the medium to larger nonprofits where they have a fuller marketing team that they could work with. On the smaller ends, no, they won't really have that. And I will get people from time to time that are like, we understand video is important, but we're not really sure how to use it. But again, I find that less because, we're all like a bit reticent. We're all a bit hesitant to spend our money. So they're really only willing to spend it when they're like, no, now I see, okay, this is a really specific thing. It's really important for us to use video. Now I'm ready to spend that money to do it.
Do
So
they sometimes get it wrong? Meaning they
With
think they know what they're doing, or they think that they know that they need it, or they think, yeah, we don't need video. And then you come along and you like eyes open as to the whole thing.
Well, there's like two questions there in that. Do they ever
At
get it
least,
wrong
yeah.
in terms of like, yeah, at least, right? Do we ever get it wrong in terms of, do we need a video or not? Or do we ever get our idea of what the video should be? Is that ever wrong? So of course it happens sometimes, right? And especially in my opinion, I may be biased, but yeah. No, there are organizations who do have certain ideas. First of all, when it comes from the concept, I've worked with people that come to me with a really specific concept. And sometimes it totally makes sense because I always say that for the nonprofit, they're the expert in their nonprofit and I'm the expert in video. And the best way to come together is for me to bring my video expertise and for them to bring their organizational expertise and for us to really work together. But sometimes you do get people that have a really specific idea, like we've already wrote the script, we've already done all of this, which is great. But it can be challenging because they haven't done it from the perspective of 15 years of making films for nonprofits. They haven't done it from the perspective of understanding this is a great script, but this is going to either be really expensive for you or it's going to be complicated for you or you're missing out on this, that, and the other thing. So there have been times when they got it right from a messaging point of view, but it can come with its challenges. But at the end of the day, I'm working with clients and they're paying me to make something. So they're hiring me for my expertise. And so I always try and tell them, look, this is what I would do in your situation and here's why I would do it. But at the end of the day, it really is their project. And if they're adamant about something, I want to deliver something that's going to be what they want. So there's always that like push and pull where it's like, okay, I'm communicating what I think is best, but at the end of the day, it really is your project and it's your call.
if you are hired to produce a video for someone, to make a video for someone, whether it's for a dinner or a fundraising campaign or whatever it is, and they don't come in with that concept, they just say, we know we need something. What is your process to help them figure out what that story is that they should tell?
Ooh, such a good question. Okay, so the first thing that we do if we're working together, first of all, if we have decided to start working together, likely is that we've had some sort of 30, 40-minute call to like, in a general sense, talk about what they're looking for. So I'm not coming in totally blind to the process, but once we've stepped over into signing contract, we're working together, let's begin. I do like to start with a clean, fresh slate because they might have mentioned something that I assumed as X or I assumed as Y. And so it's important to really like start fresh, even though we are coming in with like a bit of information. So the first thing I have them do is I have this strategy form I have them fill out, things about their organization that I might not find on their own. I ask them to do a bit of homework as well, pull up examples of videos that you like and that you don't like. You know, one person may come to me and say, we want something that's very inspirational, but what's inspirational to you may not be inspirational to me and vice versa, and also may not be inspirational to your audience. So I always um, give them the homework that they should pull up videos that are like, these are videos I hate, these are videos I love. And, you know, we can kind of break down together, okay, what do you love about this and what do you hate about this? But the real start to the process is the strategy session. So it's like a 90-minute phone call with any of the creative decision makers. So we're going through that form together. And it's really a deep dive into their organization, their audience, the goals of this event. You know, as an organization, they may in general do a lot of different things, but if we're creating for a specific dinner, a specific fundraiser, or maybe for individual meetings that they're going to have with specific donors, we want to make sure that the video is catered to that. We're going to make a very different, I don't want to say very different, but we will make a different video if we're targeting American Jewish males ages 40 to 60 than if we're trying to target more people from like 18 to 35 and we're trying to raise awareness about an issue and it's more educational. Like we speak differently, we talk differently. We're going to format the video differently as well. So I always like to start with the end in mind, and then we can go back and then build up like, okay, if this is who we're speaking to, so now let's talk about what our options are here. And the goal of that meeting is really to get a better understanding of all these things, and then I can begin to build the story.
I'm going to go back to the question before. Have you gone through a 90-minute session and you walked away thinking they don't actually know who or what they are or what their messages are or what they're putting out there? Or, you know, you feel the like foreboding sense of like, if we make this film, it's going to be a disaster for their organization. Like, do you, it's, and it comes from a space of having worked with a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders
Right.
who think
Defining
they
their
know, or
messaging. Yeah,
yeah, they think they
exactly.
know, or, you know, even worse, they're sure that they know, and you couldn't possibly know better than them. But like, I'm not putting you in like a box here, but I'm curious, like to stress you out, Elisheva, like if that happens,
It's not stressing me out because I'm not in the situation now, so I can talk about it if when it happened in the past, you know.
how do you negotiate potentially that kind of situation where you feel like they're on the wrong track here?
Yeah, so there's a few things there. I would say sometimes it is clear during that opening session. What happens is there's a lot of different voices and people describing things in different ways. So that's first of all one reason why I need to have all creative decision makers in that meeting, is because we could make something and then someone could come halfway through, look at the first cut of a video and be like, wait, this is not what I wanted. And it's like, oh, okay, hello, where have you been? So that's like one reason, but you're right, it can get complicated because when you have different voices in a meeting together, it's a question of like, who's really calling the shots here, right? So you always need to have one point person who like is my communicator I am talking to. Because again, two people, I've been in situations where like two people feel that they're communicating the same thing. But to me, I'm like, you're kind of saying something a bit different. You're putting it in this way and you're putting it in that way. And so part of that meeting is also about communicating that back to them live, not waiting until after that and be like, wait, I'm hearing this from you and I'm hearing this from you. And a lot of times when I'm open about that, people can say, oh, okay, so then actually what we mean is this. But it's not always 100% clear in that meeting. I'll tell you when it also happens is more when I send out, after this meeting, I have like a set of, I call them milestones that I send out. So one of them is keywords, and they're words that sort of define the style and tone of the film. And then the step after that is a script or an outline, depending on how scripted we want to be and depending on how interview based and more kind of like natural flowing we want to be. But either way, it's like, you know, a script more or less. So what will often happen if there is a organization that thinks they're aligned, but they're not totally aligned, is when they look at those pieces, either the keywords or the script, that is when it'll come out. Wait, that's not what we meant, or we didn't really understand this, or you didn't really get this. And so that's also really the point of a lot of these different steps. Is the worst thing in the world you can do is step into filming, having people unsure of like, I don't really know what's going on here. I really hope this comes together, or be like surprised when the video comes in. You want them to be surprised with how high quality it is and how amazing it is. But a lot of these steps help sort of prevent that. But that being said, I can only do as good of work with the information that I'm given. And so there are certain teams or certain organizations that sometimes, if they're really not aligned, it will be confusing, and we really won't be able to make something that represents them, something that's going to meet their goals, if one person's kind of wants to go this direction and another person sort of wants to go this direction. So it can be complicated. But the most important thing, I try to catch it as early as possible. I try to just say it live to them, like, this doesn't make sense to me, or you're saying this and you're saying this. Because that's the only way to sort of like stop it in its tracks before it keeps moving forward.
Yeah, Raimy, you're like, I'm talking to two storytellers who tell stories in different ways here. How does that track with your work as a writer, as opposed to the filmmaker, in terms of that whole process, that whole problem, that whole thing? Again, you've worked with many hundreds of organizations at this point, and so I'm curious about that. I knew you were about to ask a question, I cut you off, but hey,
So what's interesting about the difference between Elisheva's work as a filmmaker and my work as a writer is that I get to put words in people's mouths, right? And Elisheva doesn't. So often when I meet with organizations, and especially in certain sectors and certain types of organizations where I've just done this so many times and understand them, I think to a large extent better than they understand themselves. I think like I scared to say this in a recorded live thing that people can throw back in my face, but like I feel like I can do it better than they can do it, often tell their story better than they can. And then I'll pitch it to them, right? And then sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm not right, sometimes they don't like it, and we go from there. But what I think what's interesting about what Elisheva is saying is that she has to get it out of them, right? Like she has to get them, you have to get them to say the words that you want them to say. And that sort of like leads me to my question is like, how do you get them to tell a compelling story? Like how do you get that out of them when you don't have control of the words that they get to use? And I do. That was
Interesting. Yeah.
that was gonna be my
That
next
is,
question.
yeah, that is part of the challenge, and I will say also, it's, on the one hand, it's the same, but on the other hand, it's different when you're dealing with staff members, people from the organization, and we're curating the message together. And in many cases, they will be scripted. They're happy to be scripted. If they're representing their organization, it's like, please tell me what to say, or please give me lines in advance and we'll work with them. And then, we can have it come off natural, but they want to be scripted. But when you're dealing with case studies, with testimonials, with people who are impacted by the organization, and you're trying to tell their story, so that's a lot more complicated. So there's like a few things in place that need to happen. First of all, there's a lot of importance placed on the pre-production or the pre-interviews. So as often as possible, I really try and be in touch with the people over the phone and just talk to them. I want to hear how fast they talk. I want to hear how open they are. I want to hear, like, are they emotional about it? Are they not emotional? Because this is also where I'm going to gather that information to even tell, like, is this going to be a compelling character on camera? Not every case study you have should actually be on camera. And that's like a whole other topic, which we could talk about. But it's like, this is a topic I've given on webinars to nonprofits before, which is like how you even select your character. Just because they're willing, that's great, because we don't always have willing people who are willing to talk about how much they love your organization, but that's not the only thing that makes them compelling. There are other factors as well. So part of that pre-interview is like, how is this interview even going to go and what their story is. Then what I do is I'll take that information and I'll put it into a story that matches the story we're trying to tell in general. Are we telling an overall story of the organization? Are we pulling out one really powerful case study to show how much impact they have in the world? Like, there's a lot of different options here. And so I use that to bring that in. And then there's me constructing the interview questions. And that's also really an art in itself, because you want to open up with more easygoing questions, relaxing questions, really getting them to open up. And then it's a matter of sitting there live with them and listening to them, being present with them, and also at the same time processing, okay, they said this thing like this. Okay, we're going to want to ask this again. Okay, we're going to want to, this is a really great line. We can move past this. And it's really like, it's a lot of like in the moment live. I don't want to say performance because I'm not performing, but I'm having to process these things live and make sure that we're getting everything that we absolutely need, because a lot of times this is our only chance. This is our one shot to get it, and so we really really have to get it. So it is a bit of an art trying to pull that out of them, and a lot of it has to do with the way that I'm asking the question, the way that I'm rephrasing the question, the way that I'm kind of even taking what they say and be like, I really really love that, would you be able to say that in a shorter way, or would you be able to explain to me how X, Y, and Z impacted blah, 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 blah. So it is totally a really big challenge. And then the third part of that challenge happens in the edit. We have that stuff. Now it's about pulling it all together. So I think that's part of what makes it really interesting. And I also think it's part of what makes it compelling. We could always do scripted videos at the end of the day, but I do think that there is something specifically with Anglo audiences that this authentic approach really speaks to them. Because if you have a testimony or a case study, even from a business, like nonprofits or business, doesn't really matter, and it feels scripted, they think, okay, this person's probably telling the truth. It's probably true. But when someone is speaking as though it's really from their heart, they're like, wow, this person actually really cares. And you could tell that this is like truly authentic. So it is harder, but I do believe if you do it right, it's really, really powerful.
It seems like so much of the win in the work that you do is actually not what's happening on the camera, but it's happening off the camera. And I don't ever honestly like think about the process of how the films are made, right? Or how the documentary, because as let's say I'm the leader of an organization or I'm a board member, is it good or is it not good, right? I don't think about, right, did it help us get to what we were trying to do or not? I don't think about the process or the work that you just described, which is basically happening in the dark, right? Is all of that pre-work and all of that coaching in real time. But it's like performance coaching, right? The person ran the sprint and it was pretty good, but they could probably do it better. And maybe it's this and maybe it's that. And you're saying that was well said, or it wasn't, but you're saying to them that was really well said. Maybe can you give me a little bit more emotion? Maybe you can turn this way. Can you say it with less words, whatever that is? And no one
Right.
sees Elisheva Hudson on screen, right? She's behind the camera, she's in the editing room, whatever. And so much of your success is actually not the stuff that anyone actually notices or sees, right?
Right. No, 100%. I don't want them to see me. I mean, look, there are styles of filming where you have a host, sometimes an influencer who's like on camera and they will conduct the interview, but still everything has been thought out well in advance to be like, what are these questions and how are we asking them and that sort of thing. And you also, especially with, again, when we're not dealing with staff members and we're dealing with real people, sensitive subjects, sometimes people that are scared to be on camera, it's hard for them, it's difficult for them to share their story. You also have to be aware that it's not as simple as like, that was great. Can you be a little more emotional? Because that's like, again, something that just closes people out. So you also have to be really careful to pick up like, who is this person? What are they going to be sensitive about? How can I say this in a way that's going to open them up more and not close them off more?
I'm curious on this. You have a person comes on camera, they're telling a weepy story about how an organization helped them, right? And you're
Right.
behind the camera and it's right, but they're all in. Like they opened up, and you have to go and tell them now, can you do that again, please? Like, how do you do that? Like, how do you do that?
Well, that's an interesting example because if you're telling me that they're very emotional, I'm saying that's amazing. That's great. I'll tell you what happens more, which is a really big challenge, is that because I think it's getting a bit better these days, but we are constantly fighting like how short can we make it as short as possible, that sort of thing. So what actually happens more is that it just takes a while to get that story out. They were in a place over here. How did they get to this place that was really challenging for them? And then they went to A, and then they went to B, and then they went to C. And it's only like through that journey that you can actually feel like, wow, that's amazing that you came out of it on the other side, and here you are, and here's the success, and blah, blah, blah. What happens more is that, wow, there is so much to this story, and how do we cut it down? So that's where I have to do a lot of my work in advance to be like, okay, skip this part, skip this part, skip this part. I really only want them to talk about A and then skip to D and then go to J and whatever it is. And thinking about how can I cut this down? How can I make this 45-minute interview into a 2-minute clip, right? And finding ways that to get them to communicate that allow me to make those cuts and skip this part or move this part over here. That's more what happens, is that there's really too much story. If somebody's emotional and if somebody's into what they're talking about and they're passionate about what they're talking about, it's usually very good, compelling stuff. On the other side, what's like the other side of that worst case scenario situation is where somebody's so short-winded because they're just not opening up. Like maybe they were really open with me on the phone because it's easy to just, like talk to Elisheva on the phone and, relax and chill and that sort of thing. And then they get in front of the camera and it's really difficult. It's really difficult for many people. And part of my job is bringing that out of them, but I'm also not a magic maker. Have skills, I have tools in my toolkit, but like I can't transform who somebody is if they're really, really, if it's really difficult for them. So that's actually more the worst case scenario is like, this was really great on the phone before, and here we are, and they're having a really tough time, which can happen. So in those situations, I like to make a bit of a contingency plan. So don't only rely on one story to tell your entire nonprofit. It's good to have 2 to 3 that we can work with just in case, or in case somebody cancels last minute, because that is also what happens if you're asking people to give up their time for free, that sort of thing. But I would say those are the main challenges. Too long of a story, or it's very difficult for them to open up in the moment, making it a less relatable story for the audience.
Is there like a set of best practices around taking a story that's long and finding this relevant, salient details that still make it a compelling story, but keeping it as short as possible? It's a challenge that absolutely resonates with me. Like I totally,
Sure.
totally get that. I don't have that list, so I'm asking for selfish motives. Like, please, how do I do that? Because it's a good story and the details all feel important. So how do you take that and condense it so it is bite size and within people's short
Right.
attention spans?
So part of it happens in pre-production, I would say, which is like, let's say somebody has an entire story. I'm thinking of one. I did a video for this organization that helps with like health and wellness to help women with like infertility, right? So a lot of these women had these different stories, very emotional. This woman who just had a miscarriage and this organization helped her and she was so emotional about it, right? But it feels very inappropriate, first of all, to be like, great, can you say that shorter? Like you have to let them just kind of like get it out in a certain sense. But part of that does happen before. So I've had a pre-call with her. I more or less kind of know her story. And you have a sense of like, okay, first I really try to like write the story for myself. So if I know that she went here and this happened and she had this many miscarriages and this many things happened to her, and then she found this center, and then she ended up doing yoga at this center, and then so and so helped her. Like these are way too many details, especially if I'm including 2 or 3 case studies and a testimonial, and the video is supposed to be 3 to 5 minutes. Like like this is like getting very complicated, right? So what the first thing that I do is be like, okay, if I could control every element of the story and drill it down to the most possible things, what would I focus on? I would jump right into the heart of it. So, and this is what we did. Where was she when she was at her darkest place? She had just had this miscarriage. She literally had nowhere to go. She found the organization and mentioned a name, and this person helped me out of it. All of these other details, it's really just going to make the story so much longer. And you'll have to think about like, what are the things that people are going to care about most, right? We can't hear about all the details about all the other things that led her to that place, about every single class she took at the organization. So it's like thinking in advance about like, okay, if I could simplify this into the most simple thing, what would I do? But then you have to sit there, and I think the most important thing is get the story in totality, right? Let them share the whole thing, because asking them to cut down for you, essentially like doing the work for me, is not necessarily going to go as well, right? So have them do the whole story, but then it's my job to then go back and focus in on specific parts. Tell me about when you were at your lowest and what that was like for you, and then jump to the next part that I know I want to include. Tell me about that first day that you stepped into the center and what that was like for you. And then third question, I don't know, I'm like making it up as I go, but like, Tell me about one moment, one thing. This is like a tool that I have, which is like to be more specific as opposed to general. Share one memory with me. Tell me about the day you came in. Tell me about one person who did something. Because oftentimes that will be short. They're not going to tell a whole story about one person. But that will help, at least me with the story and me in the edit, be able to just take a small piece, because that one interaction with a staff member or that one moment where she remembered she finally like felt happier or something like that, that can be used to summarize her entire experience with the organization, let's say. So it was a very long answer to what you were asking, but it's sort of about like, I have to have in my head the main things I want to focus on, let them get out everything they need to get out, but then review it with specific points in mind that I'm trying to get. And usually it's those points that we end up using in the edit at the end of the day.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense.
I'm curious in terms of location. I'm going to switch a little bit gears here just because I'm curious about the filmmaking process a little bit. Locations. Does location help you tell the story better? Does it help someone sometimes open up better to the story they need to tell? Like in terms of how you craft a shot of how you want it to look, and it's just more the direction of it than it is anything else maybe, but I don't even know. But I'm super curious about how it's shot and how the visuals look around it. Not just because you could do voice and you could just zoom in on a person's head and you can do an interview with somebody, and that's one thing. But if it's in a meadow and whatever it is, the visual behind it, right? I don't know. I have the flowers over my shoulder, that's why. But I'm curious about that. If you could talk more about the production value around just the storytelling that you're doing.
Yeah, it's a great question. Oh my gosh. So the thing about background is both literally and figuratively, it gives the context for what we're seeing. And what I love about working with these type of visuals is that look, we're always struggling to be like, how do we get all this information in? We need to say these things and we need to hear these things, and you can't both read text and hear things at the same time, right? We're always like trying to get information in. But the beautiful thing about something like locations, backgrounds, or some of these other B-roll shots that we will get in the video is that it allows you to communicate things to your audience without taking up so much mental headspace from them, right? So what do I mean by that? So let's say we have an interview with someone who had been through something really difficult, come from like a lower end community, something like that. So for that, we need to think about how do we want to represent them? It doesn't make sense to go into some fancy Airbnb, some nice hotel rental, some whatever, because that doesn't represent them and who we are. And we're also kind of wasting precious, I guess you could say, real estate on the audience by not communicating something to them. So in their space, something that represents what does their house look like? What does their environment look like? What does it feel like? Is it rough? Is it grungy? Is it nice and organized and clean? Or maybe it's just simplistic. You just notice they don't have many things in there. So there is this interesting relationship between, we want the video to look really nice. We want it to be high production value. And still at the same time, we also want to be honest, and we want to use that every little bit of real estate that we have to be communicating something at all times. And then the third thing in the mix that also gets us really interesting is we have to work practicality. What is the budget of the film? What do we have access to? It might not be possible if we're filming a series of different case studies to go up north and film them over here and down south on another day and go to the Mirpaz another day and that sort of thing. That just may not be in the budget. Sometimes it is simpler to set up in an office. Everyone can meet us that day, but you do end up losing out some of that texture that you get when it comes to these background locations, when it comes to these other pieces that really make the audience feel like, wow, I just felt like I'm in their community. I felt like I'm really with them. So it's always a balance between these things. And yes, if budget was endless, which is like, when is it ever endless? But if budget was endless, we could create some really amazing things, not only environment, but also just the way that the background makes audiences feel. Like a space that's more cluttered, or the way that we frame it, if it feels like more crowded, that's going to give the audience one feeling versus a wide open, beautiful space, or filming outside in landscape and meadows like you're talking about. That's also going to make the audience feel something different. And so you always want to be intentional with these things, but it's always combined with what are the practicalities of what are we working with people's availability, the budget that we have, and trying to make the best out of the situation that we have.
I'm going to ask a question that might not be so fair, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You, we've talked a lot, you've brought up several times, budget and price, and that's obviously, especially in the nonprofit sector, something on people's minds and a concern. What do you tell people that want to do a video, don't really have the budget to hire a professional to come in and think about these things that you don't think about unless you're in it? Like, is it worth doing a video if you can't do it right?
Oh, it's such a good question. Yeah, there's a lot of different answers to this, and obviously it's a spectrum of where people are at. There's not like, a lot of times it's not just like, oh, do you have money for A or do you have money for B? And like, there's a lot of in between there. There's a lot of like, we have money for this much or not for that much and that sort of thing. So there's a few different things. If an organization really care, like they value video, but they honestly do not have the funds for it, there are things that I would suggest that maybe in year one, like in the current year that we're in, things that they could do to prepare themselves for the following year to do it. So if an organization comes to me and they don't really have a social media presence, right? They don't really have an audience that's with them and following them and that sort of thing. And they're not doing something for a specific fundraiser, but they're just like, we know we need video, but we don't really have money for it at all. I don't know why they're coming to me if they don't have money for it, but whatever, let's come up with the situation. So I would actually probably advise them that it's not the right time for them to do a super professional video. It's the time for them to get someone on their team to start creating more content, even if it's photos or maybe some amateur videos. Give them a bit of training as to what are the most effective ways to use their smartphone, things at their disposal. Maybe they have some events in the coming year that people in their team can sort of cover, and just start posting things like that, because you really need to have an audience to make the most out of a video. And this is just for general social media, right? So I would say the first thing is to try and do stuff on your own and build up that community. And also for yourself to be testing internally for your marketing team, for your social media team, you need to test what works for your audience. If you have different ages audience, there are going to be different things that work for your nonprofit on different platforms based on who your audience is and what's going on there. So that's sort of like one possibility if they're at that stage. Now, the next thing is funnily enough with nonprofits, especially if you're doing a fundraiser. It's funny because I get this question a lot from people, which is like, do you have a special rate for nonprofits? But almost primarily with nonprofits. So I don't really have a special rate for nonprofits. I just work with them. But it's funny because I actually find that, especially when it comes to fundraisers, whether it's cosmetic fundraiser, online fundraiser, in-person fundraiser, dinner, something like that, your ROI is immediate. So if anything, if we're talking about the value of the video that you're going to get from creating it from this one-off event or from a specific fundraising situation, that value is so much more. And if anything, you're going to see that money come back to you right away. So in those situations, what I would say is I would actually speak to them about, what do you stand to make at this fundraiser? Like, what are the possibilities here? And let's talk about what possibilities you have from showing this video versus showing a more in-house video or amateur video, or versus showing no video at all, maybe just a slideshow or just pictures or whatever it is. And so I would probably take the route of sharing with them what the different possibilities are. And it could be that even if they quote unquote don't have money, or they didn't plan to spend this money in this quarter, that a lot of times they could potentially be losing money on this fundraiser and future fundraisers if they don't kind of like pull out all the stops. So there's not one answer in terms of like they should be doing this or they should be doing that, but I think it's looking at a multitude of things, which is, what is your community like currently? Who are the people that you already have? Next is, what are the ways that this is going to be used? What is the potential for ROI on this? A lot of times, and I've seen organizations do this, like it's really just a question of maybe finding someone to sponsor a video or getting that money up front, because it's so worth it to have something high quality for certain fundraisers or certain events that, I mean, I hate the term like you're leaving money on the table, but sometimes you really are. Like sometimes, for certain events, especially if you have people matching, like it really is such a shame to not be as professional as possible and put in the effort that that much more effort in order to get that much more out of it.
Yeah, it sounds so much like a lot of things we talk about with nonprofits and that scarcity kind of mindset about it, rather
Right.
than looking at it as an investment in, the future or investment in that event because the ROI is going to be immediate, or we have the content from that production piece for years and years and years. It's going to live on YouTube. It's going to live on our website. We're going to repackage and reuse it over and over and over again at some point later on in different ways. That was like classic sales. Like, let me show you the ROI on the value of this video. If you produce it, let's figure out a way to make this happen for you right now because you will be leaving money on the table. I'm curious about a related question because you mentioned it and it was interesting how you framed it. Should have put social media production here, like down, and then the right, and then the documentary video approach at a high, like that's step two, that's the step up, that's the progression. So I'm curious on, is there a competition on some level between the documentary producers and filmmakers and the stuff a lot of people are putting up on YouTube, social media, things like that?
Talking about
And then
content creators
relatedly,
versus,
yeah, yeah. And then related to
yeah,
that question is, in terms of production value, a lot of the time that stuff is, on a selfie stick, and the production value is very low, but the eyeballs that it grabs are very high. So I'm
right.
curious if that comes into how you think about doing things, and B, if that's I don't know if it's a problem or it's something you're sort of working with or you're dealing with, is
Right. Is
how
it a
video is being
challenge?
produced now.
Right. Yeah, it's so funny. I didn't mean to do it as like, oh, here's the low level and here's the high level. Because really, I'll tell you, when I do video packages for people, I work into it social media, reels, videos, or even just raw clips. I mean, I edit them, of course, but it's like individual clips that aren't necessarily edited into a finished video, but that they have access to so that they can put in reels. They can add text on and have their social media person do different things with. Like, I really do believe if you're going to invest in a video, that you should get the most out of it. And social media is one of those pieces, 100%. I would say, yeah, this idea of like the different levels of production, because I do see a lot of people nowadays, like social media people who also have in their toolkit creating reels. And so, like content creators and that sort of thing. Or what I see also a lot is that they'll throw on a marketing or social media person in a nonprofit and be like, okay, just make us videos. I feel so bad for them. Like, it's a little bit more complicated than that, like, okay, they have to work out how to do this, and then it takes away time from what they're doing and that sort of thing. So if you're working on someone internally, I would say you want to be wary of the hours that they're spending training themselves or trying to get different shots or trying to edit these things together. Like, could be working on analyzing metrics and reviewing things and posting on different platforms and that sort of thing. But anyways, that's like a different subject. So yeah, I guess I would say sometimes it's a challenge because look, especially with nonprofits, you're always dealing with like they want this as cheap as possible. So why would they come over to me, spend a bunch of money on something when they could go over here to a social media person who kind of includes video content in their package? Okay, it's not done to the same level, but they could do it. I would say that there's a need for both. And it's a question of when, how, and like as it makes sense for you. I would say that some of that ongoing social media content that's done either from someone in their team or a social media person, that's great for like ongoing event coverage. That's great throughout the year. Whenever there's something going on, okay, they get some stuff. And sometimes they've even used that in videos. If they come to me and we're doing a higher level strategic video for their nonprofit, the reality is like very, very rarely is anybody going to have the budget to bring me on and for like 15 or 30 days throughout the year and film all their different events. And I also don't know that it's necessary for me to film every single thing that they do. I think the place for strategic, high quality video is thinking more long term about what their goals are. How can we craft a really unique story that's going to speak to their audience? And how can we do this at the high quality, highest? Whereas at the content creator level, and again, like I'm not saying any shade to them. One's not better than the other. I think like all these things are necessary. There's a value in that there's ongoing coverage for all the things that you're doing that you can use at different times. And there also is a value for the audience in kind of feeling like this is very casual. I feel like I'm with them. I feel like I'm kind of like at the event. I feel like this is more relaxed and people do, there's a reason why when you mention social media and like all the eyeballs they get on it, there's a reason why. It's because it just feels very casual and nice. But I do think that if you rely on that 100% and you never do something more high level, first of all, it's going to be really hard for you to step out of yourself and think about your long-term storytelling strategy that you're communicating to your audience. And this is like more of like a marketing and branding type of thing. But it's hard for you to step out of that and really analyze, okay, like what are we communicating and why are we communicating? And also, I think that it does have an impact on your fundraisers. I think that when you come to the table, when you come to a fundraiser and you've shown we really care about our stories, we really care about the quality of things that we're making, and this is something high quality, that speaks more than if you go to a fundraiser and it's just like pictures edited together that are cute and nice. And some of these pictures are really cute. And some of these like moments that you caught throughout the year, they are like, wow, this is so special. But people can see the amount that you're investing. And I think that even if it's subconscious, they react to that.
Do you cringe when you see bad production? Do you cringe? Does it like drive you crazy? Because
Well,
I'm going to be honest, like Raimi and I have discussed this, not on the podcast, in other contexts and other places. When we get bad fundraising emails or we see
right,
bad
right,
rates, we'll talk about them privately because it drives us crazy that such poor quality is being put out there, and we're a little
right,
bit
right.
snobbery about it. Like I can say that about me. I won't say that for Raimi, but I feel that about me with certain aspects of it. There's a certain snobbery that comes to it, and it makes me cringe. So does that
Right.
happen for you with like
Well,
someone
I'll tell
puts
you
up?
what I do a lot. If I see a fundraiser from an organization I know, the first thing I do is click and be like, do they have a video? And did they make a video? And like, do I know who made this video? Right? It's good to keep yourself apprised of what's going on.
Yes.
So the first thing is like, is there a video? And sometimes there's not. And I'm always like, I wonder why, especially with like even bigger organizations that I know have the budget. It's always just interesting to me. I don't know why they chose to do that. Okay. So that's like one level. Then there's the next level of like, they didn't make a video and they just used internal stuff, which to me just says either they put this together too last minute and so they just didn't have the time and the energy to put together a video, which I think happens more than we're talking a lot about budget, but I think a lot of times organizations just get overwhelmed. They didn't take the time because you can't make a video like this, a high quality video in a week. It doesn't work. So a lot of times I think it has to do with time as well as with budget. So then there's like, they didn't really make a video, but they put together smartphone footage, they put together photos and like, okay, good for them for doing something, but something must have happened there that they just, either they didn't value video or they weren't able to put it. So that's another thing. And then there's another section, which is I see that they hired someone to make this video. And yeah, I do see things that I sometimes disagree with that I wouldn't do. I am always curious when people take an interview, talking to real people approach versus like a more scripted approach and why they decided to do that. I've done a lot of research. This is kind of a different topic, but I've done research also on the different styles and who it speaks to. I find that in the Israeli world, and also I would say in the Israeli Haredi world, that there's more of an emphasis on scripted videos, on like everything has to be like perfect and look a certain way. And like, I think that that kind of like speaks to them. It can be a bit cheesy, but for Anglos, whether they're Anglos in Israel or Anglos living in their country that they live in, I think the more authentic approach works for them. So real interviews with real people, if you fake things, if you script them, there's kind of this like in the back of their head, like, oh, is this really what happened? Or why is it scripted? Or could they not find anyone real to do it? And I'm not talking about when things have to be anonymous because they're sensitive. I'm talking more about if it's actually really scripted. So there is that dynamic to it as well. But I often will look at these projects and just kind of ask myself, I wonder why they took that approach, or I wonder why they went this direction as opposed to that direction. And then there's, of course, always just the analyzing of different production values, which is like, that's interesting how they lit it, or interesting how they did this. But that's more of a like a production thing and less of like a nonprofit thing.
How do you see the role of video or the technology? I don't You can take this question any direction you want, but how do you see it evolving specifically for nonprofits? Like you've been in the field now for a number of years and things are changing around us like so incredibly rapidly. How do you see video changing within that ecosystem?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like video has changed for us so much in the past 10 years. And it's kind of like, what do the next 10 years look like? So I think that obviously AI has changed so many things and it will continue to change so many things. I think it makes a lot more things accessible. There's all this talk about like AI is going to take over every single creative's job, which I don't really believe at all. But I do think that you have to be smart about using it. Like I'll use it in a lot of cases, but that doesn't mean like I go into AI, tell it to make a video for me, and then charge someone a bunch of money for that video. That's like not how it works, right? I use it to like speed up my processes, but I do think moving forward, we're going to see a lot of advancements in general footage and how realistic it is. So if you weren't able to go and film, I don't know, let's say there's like a cancer organization or something like that, and you weren't able to go into a hospital. I think in the moving forward, it's going to be more and more realistic that you could create something that enables you to get some general footage of like people in a hospital and it's going to look more realistic and that sort of thing. But where that's not going to be able to, I feel like even in the future, like get there 100% is with individual stories and real people. Yeah, you can create AI type of people, but I think that having individuals look at stories, craft stories, and tell real stories of real people that organizations have helped, that's always going to be kind of like the one-on-one person. So that's one thing that I would say is like we always want to be looking at how AI is going to impact anything creative, any production elements. That's number one. Number two is that I think that we have a callback to longer form content. There was this obsession for so long of make it as short as possible, make it 90 seconds, make it 1 minute. And like things should still be as short as possible. But I also think that, even on Instagram, it moved to 3 minute reels in order to kind of compete with TikTok and 3 minutes there. We see the rise of podcasts like these. I was like at an event the other day and someone mentioned something. There's a very popular podcast or YouTube series that just takes, I mean, this isn't nonprofits, but it's just like interesting to see where audiences are at. But it goes into 3 or 4 hour long episodes, just like deep diving into different industries and different, I think she mentioned IKEA or something like that, that they like deep dive into like the background of IKEA, all that. And people love it and people watch it. So I think that we're moving away from just this obsession that everything needs to be as short as possible and more about like it's about context. On YouTube, people will watch things for longer. Podcasts, people will listen to things for longer. Okay, on social media, we're dealing with like a different type of flow, but that's also because we're dealing with the feed, but not because we're unable to consume things that are longer. I mean, people may not watch like 3 hour films, but they will watch 10 seasons of a 15 episode show. And like, what is that about? Like altogether, you've like wasted a lot more time than if you were to just watch a film, right? But the idea being that it's about context, that's next. And then I'm mentioning a lot of general things, but not really putting it back to nonprofits. But I think with nonprofits, we'll see more videos that are more personal. What do I mean by that? So we'll create like video campaigns, but thinking more creatively about how we can take our main video or our main campaigns and make them more individualized to donors. So maybe that means at the beginning of each video having like specific address to a specific donor or a specific community. Like anything you can do that doesn't make a video just feel like general, it makes it feel more personal, it makes it feel more interactive. I think that we're gonna see more of that. And I know that every single day technology becomes more accessible, cameras become more accessible to everyone, but I do believe that more and more nonprofits will continue to see the value in high quality storytelling, high quality looks of films, but most importantly, being a bit more strategic about the stories that they're sharing and why they're sharing them.
Super interesting. As you were talking about it, like a slew of ideas flew through my head as to how you would tell the same story for an organization, but for different tracked audiences of that organization, because you went out and did 4 or 5 hours of good, interviews and conversations with people, and now you're able to almost create a template of sorts for the organization, and on some level picking your spots and picking your pieces to drop in, but the tech allows you to do some of the things that might have taken you hours to do before. You can do
Right,
it
right. Now it's
maybe
so much
quickly.
faster. Yeah, 100%,
Super,
100%.
super interesting. We're almost out of time, so I want to do a little bit of rapid stuff here with you if we can
Sure.
here at the end. Okay. I'm going to start here. If you had to pick someone as a dream collaborator, somebody to work with, alive or dead, Who would it be?
Oh, who would I work with? Hourglass. You want me to like to do the answer? Are we doing fast paced? Just answer.
Yeah, it's, maybe there's a filmmaker that just inspired you, that you would see like, oh, I'd love to spend an hour with that person, pick their brain about the work that they do, and and if I had the opportunity to collaborate with them on a project, that would be that person for me.
Right, right. Yeah, so it's not a filmmaker, but I would say Ira Glass, the the creator of This American Life, that podcast. He does a lot talking about like creativity and just talking about the process of just like getting stuff out, even though it's bad, and putting it out there. And even though today, like podcasts like his are like, there's a million of them, but I do feel like it was really interesting how he really put out there this similar story driven approach, but for radio and podcast and that sort of thing. So I think it would be really interesting to take some of my ideas and just collaborate on one project.
You have a favorite documentary?
Documentary.
Could be one that you made, by the way. Doesn't have to be someone else's. Could be your own.
Oh my gosh, I don't think I'd say something I made. That would be super interesting. A favorite documentary? Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a like intense subject, but there wasn't. I remember it was from years ago when I was really young, probably one of like the early stage of getting into documentaries. There's this one called Capturing the Freedmans, and it was about this situation of it's like crime that happened, and did they do it? Did they not do it? But what I found so interesting is that the filmmaker, as you watch these interviews of like what really happened throughout, you were taken, like you were really like on one side the whole time, and then at the end when they gave you a different perspective, all of a sudden the audience like slowly shifted to be like, oh, I thought it was this way the whole time and I thought it was that way. And that was something when I was like early on in my documentary days, I really saw how much power and responsibility, like we talked about at the beginning, that the filmmaker has, and a lot of responsibility that they should take responsibility for, and how vital it is to bring to the table like ethics to what you're doing, really think deeply about what you're saying and why you're saying it, and how much power you have to like convince your audience of something and be really, really aware of it.
Good. I love that. Okay, you finished all the videoing, you did all the filming, you're now sitting down to a long editing session. What's the snack or drink that Elisheva Hudson has on the table with her when she's doing that long session?
Always coffee. Oh my gosh. Always, always coffee. Snack. I don't know about snack because I feel like if I have a snack, then I'm just going to get distracted and be like, oh, let me first like finish my food and then I'll do this. And it's definitely very easy for me to be distracted, especially with edits. So, yes, it's always coffee and maybe some water.
No matter what time of the day, it's always coffee?
No, no, oh my gosh, no, not no matter what time of the day. I guess okay. So if it's past 4 p.m., I'll take a tea, but it's not as
Thank you
fun.
for clarifying. I appreciate that. Raimy, got any more?
I think I'm tapped out.
I got one more. One more. We'll
Let's
finish
hear
with
it.
this one. You've been doing this a long time and you've made a lot of films. Can you think of a scene or a film specifically of yours that just that's the one that sits with you? That's the one that you'll never forget. That's the one that always, if you're having a tough moment, you come back to, and it just gets you back on track.
One of my projects you're working
Yes,
on, you're
one
saying.
of
So
yours.
like, ooh,
It's not a
that's
knock
a
on the other ones. It's just that certain projects, like in my
yeah.
experience in my work in with coaching and consulting, there are some organizations that I connect with better than others, or the work was more meaningful, or we did something, unbelievable, whatever it is. And so it always comes back to that thing, right? For me. So I'm curious if that's the case for you too, somewhere.
Yeah, I would say there's a project I worked on years ago for Friends of Short Static. So it was the Canada branch of this one. And we were making a fundraising video and we made one about this boy and his father. They were in a terrorist attack and they had this really kind of just like transformational recovery. They did not think that they would make it. So we kind of told the story of the son and the father. Unfortunately, the father, his wife, she died in this car accident, a terrorist attack, that sort of thing. But it was just so, I do go back to it sometimes and I watch it. And it's a really powerful story. Why was Friends of Shari Tzedek telling it? Because they treated them at Shari Tzedek, and Shari Tzedek did so much for them. But why do I love this story? I think that it was the first time that an organization just really trusted me to take this more story driven approach, because a lot of times with organizations, they want to tell like their whole organization story. They want to be like, let's interview all the staff members and all the people, but they were so dedicated to telling it through the story of this family that was so helped by Shari Tzedek. And so that's one reason why I absolutely love it. And I do think it was so powerful. And so sometimes I just watch it like it was such a honor to be able to tell that story, to do good work. And the videos as well were really, really powerful. You know, we created longer videos and shorter videos, and we put it out across. We did so much, raised a lot of money for them. So I look at that, and I kind of see that as like the first in that style of videos I was doing for nonprofits. It's like, this really like set me on my journey of taking this approach.
Awesome. All right. Let's finish this out. Evan, where can people find you if they want to work with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Elisheva Hudson. You can find me on my website, hudsonfilmsdocustory.com. Probably LinkedIn is the easiest place to find me.
Okay. We'll put it in the show notes, no worry, at the end. Elisheva Hudson,
Amazing.
thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And look
Pleasure.
forward
Yeah,
to
it was
seeing
really
you,
fun.
talking to you again in the future.
Okay, great.
Bye.